it shows him being pinned to the ground by deputies while he was already handcuffed. A warning: the details of this incident may be disturbing to some viewers.
Words can't describe.
This morning, the family of a Virginia man who died while in custody at a hospital is demanding answers.
Can someone explain to me why my brother's not here right now?
10 people have been charged with the second-degree murder of 28-year-old Ivo Otieno, including 3 employees of the Central State Hospital and 7 Henrico Police Sheriff's deputies. Otieno's family says he was in the middle of a mental health crisis when he was handcuffed, shackled, and smothered
Sorry
to death
about that.
after being transported to a state mental hospital. The family furious after viewing surveillance video of the incident.
He was murdered. They smothered the breath out of my baby. They murdered my baby.
On March 3rd, authorities placed Otieno under an emergency custody order, which is used in cases of mental illness in response to a report of a possible burglary. He was transported to a hospital where police say he assaulted 3 officers and was subsequently arrested and taken to jail, where his family and attorneys say he was left naked in a cell. 3 days later, he was taken to a state mental health facility where his family says he suffered a brutal 11-minute beating.
You could see his hair being pulled, and you could see knees toward his head. It was excruciating to watch.
Prosecutors said in court that Otieno died of asphyxia due to being smothered to death thanks to having at least 7 people on top of him and holding him down. The Henrico Police Union is standing by the deputies.
I know that the sheriff is anxiously watching this to see what's happening, but our position, I believe, is still that they were doing their job and they're doing it the best they could.
Otieno's family wants justice.
Mental illness should not be your ticket to death.
The surveillance footage the family saw yesterday has not been publicly released. They're now calling on the Department of Justice to intervene in this case, saying Otieno's constitutional rights were violated.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, thank you.
This morning we have, and
I'm going to weigh in on
Also works great because there's 3 different flavors, so you can vary.
what that they was just talking about in regards towards that individual. These healthcare workers, these doctors, these nurses, the people that's associated with hands-on incidences towards dealing with the human emotion factor, God bless them, and more the luck to them in regards towards the field that they have chosen to get into, towards helping people with these type of problems. That's not only physical problems, but also emotional problems. I want to say that their works, as far as I'm concerned, basically goes over into the category of trying to get this right here if I can. Nope, I don't know why it ain't pulling back around like I want it to. Anyways, let's just do it this way while we're looking at this and I'm talking. God bless them for their endeavors and what that they do. And of course, that's also talking about first responders in regards towards them dealing with the general public. And it doesn't matter if it's first responders towards being ambulance attendants, or people putting out fires, or people working in policing the general public. But whenever people don't put those things into the right perspective in regards towards various people out there that's got these type of problems, then it reaches a level of unprofessionalism. Now, I'm going to use the incident that recently just happened over in Memphis, Tennessee, towards a group of people that took it upon themselves towards executing basically an open execution, the same as they did George Floyd, that we all seen on TV, where they took a man that was not no form or fashion towards harming them and killed him right in front of everybody. Whenever we continue to see this pattern of behavior that obviously is the wrong type of behavior coming from our professional industry, you have to start asking yourself the question, what is going on here? Why is these people that's supposed to be trained properly, how come they cannot put it into the equation towards knowing that they're going to be dealing with sometimes some very, very sensitive situations, emotional situations? And I've been told that possibly one of the worst situations is domestic terrorism that happens within the home front, where a wife and a husband or a girlfriend and a boyfriend are fighting, or two girls or two boys are fighting, and once the police officer engages in that pursuit that can lead into a battle, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, the state of affairs will change to the point that the very person that you was trying to defend in that confrontation will now turn on you, towards both of them gaining up on the cop all at one time. So it can be extremely liquid in how that things can unravel, in the way that they can unravel. And I just feel so sorry, because these professional people, some of them really do not understand what that they have volunteered their services for. It's the same way as a preacher. If he's a true preacher out here fighting against the spirituality of the demonic forces, if he don't understand the warfare that he's involved in, that can come in 1,000+ ways of destroying people's lives, either physically or emotionally or chemically or any other type of way, if he don't understand that, he's really not a preacher, as far as I'm concerned, not a God-called preacher anyway. Because a God-called preacher is going to know that you're actually fighting up against the hounds of hell, just like the Bible talks about, that we fight not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities of the works of the evil one. And there's going to be times that a preacher is going to have to deal with sensitive situations, towards holding somebody's hand while they're sitting there taking their last breath, or holding somebody's hand towards not knowing if that relationship has now been torn completely apart and it's basically unfixable, or holding somebody's hand towards trying to deliver that person from whatever type of chemical disparities that person may be on, male or female. That if they're not willing to roll up their sleeves and get a little dirt on them, then they probably shouldn't be working with the public. My dad used to always tell us boys, whenever something would happen and we'd want to pout, we'd want to get ill, we would have our feelings hurt, because of something that was either said or done. Of course, my father, he was very raw and to the point and abusive to begin with. But he used to always tell us boys that if you wear your feelings on your shirt sleeve, they're bound to get hurt. Now, the reason why that I brought this up is because there was an incident that happened with me yesterday, just as of yesterday, and I'm not going to mention names, but whenever you become a diabetic, especially a obese diabetic, it's difficult sometimes for you to take care of essential needs. And whenever I'm talking about essential needs, I'm talking about most people, I mean, I did up until just a few years ago, could maintain my feet and could maintain my toenails and could maintain the things that needed to be maintained, that all humans, if they live a lengthy life at all, has to start maintaining, especially whenever you get a little age on you. Well, thank God that the medical industry has now a group of people that does that for those type of people that can't do that. The particular people that's helping me, all right, used to be over here in Union City. Now they're back down here in Dyersburg, Tennessee. But the woman come from out west that actually used to be a paramedic that actually operated on people in starting out cutting off their toes, then cutting off their feet, and then the next thing you know, had to wind up amputating their leg. Then if that didn't work out, they wound up dying. Because people that's diabetic has essential problems whenever it comes to infection and healing properly that most people don't never ever have to encounter. Whenever I was growing up, I never had diabetes 2 or diabetes 1. Diabetes 1 is actually worse than diabetes 2. But whenever I was growing up, I never had those problems. I didn't know of no family members in my family that ever had those type of problems. But because of what they done to me up in Kentucky towards putting me on Risperdal, and even though it was only for a short period of time, that changed my biological internal clock. And I don't know if it was my thyroid. I can't really pinpoint just exactly what happened. I just know that I went from struggling of about 240 pounds, that was, halfway obese at the age of about 55, right at 55, 52, something like that. I went from struggling from that to within a 90-day period going from 240 to 340. And since then, I actually got up at one time to about 367 pounds. Since then, I've lost, I've lost about 25 pounds since then. And I'm still trying to lose weight to this day because I have changed over from my diabetic doctor to another diabetic doctor that I believe is giving me better medication of this time delay capsule that I take only once a day now, that's got the metformin and all that in there, to the degree that whenever I was going to another doctor down in Dyersburg from India, all he wanted to do was give you nothing but metformin, and I don't know if people's ever or if anybody can relate to this. I'm sure they can if they've ever had this type of problem. But if you're steadily on metformin, you have a problem with your valves. And it can come upon you just as quickly as you being out here in the public as it can with you being driving down the road. And that's one way to treat that particular system or symptoms of that system. But now the doctors has figured out that there's a better way other than just basically having valve irregularities all the time. So I've changed doctors. And I was fortunate enough to hook up with this other doctor that used to be a primary doctor that done that type of operations and stuff out west, but she decided that she didn't no longer want to do that, that she wanted to prevent people from having to get amputated toes that could lead into amputated feet, that could lead into amputated legs, that could lead into death. So she started being a groomer. I call her a groomer. I don't know what the actual name for her position is, but they basically look at your feet, and according to the medical industry, as long as you do that every 3 months, you can pretty well stay on top of any type of infection, any type of sore, any type of ingrown toenail, any and all the above that can start out something very, very minute, something very little, and wind up towards being something very, very big. So whenever you're diabetic, you got to be really, really oversensitive towards getting cuts and scrapes and hurting yourselves. And you got to be very sensitive towards watching if there's a rash or a laceration that comes up on your skin or an ingrown toenail. That's the primary purpose for this. Well, I had been working with this agency, I'm going to call them an agency, towards getting me some free diabetic shoes that once more the health insurance, the Medicaid health insurance will allow for you to get one pair of shoes a year. Well, there was a doctor up here in Union City, and he wound up ditching and going to Canada. I don't know what his primary purpose was. May have been something to do with something that he done wrong, and he was afraid that he was going to wind up having an answer to it for. But then again, it may have just been a money issue. I don't know. I don't know all the particulars about it. But anyways, he had already gotten me a pair of diabetic shoes, and he'd already done worked on me in Union City towards clipping my toenails and making sure that I didn't have no sores or lacerations on my feet that, like I said, can start out something very, very minute that can turn into something that can be a tragedy for a person if they don't watch. So whenever you're diabetic, you really have to stay on top of these things. Anyways, I've been working with these girls. That's basically the receptionists and the nurses in this particular industry since December the 22nd of last year, in getting the proper paperwork signed, because you got to go through certain procedures before the medical industry will pay for you a pair of shoes. And they was having difficulty with my diabetic doctor, so I had to drive and go get her to sign the papers, and come to find out the paperwork was forged. Whoever signed the paperwork was not qualified in signing the paperwork. And I didn't realize or understand the formalities of the legal issues towards that somebody can treat people with diabetic problems and not actually have a paramedic degree, but as long as they have somebody over them, they can still perform that type of service. So I've been haggling with them back and forth. Now today's March the 17th, St. Patrick's Day, 2023. And yesterday morning, whenever I called, I was in a really good mood, hoping that everything was going to be established. And like I said, I'd already had this issue come up probably about 4 or 5 different times. And I had already went out of my way towards driving here and doing this and jumping through this cartwheel and jumping through that cartwheel. And whenever I found out that my shoes was not there, and I found out that things still had not been taken care of properly, I got agitated. And I guess because I got agitated, I got a bit emotional. Now, I didn't go to calling people names. I didn't go to screaming and hollering and somebody that was basically out of my mind, because I know better than to treat people that way. That's called verbal abuse. And no matter what type of service that you're in, you really don't deserve verbal abuse. But at the same time, these people that are working with these type of people must realize, regardless whether it be the incident that they just got through showing on TV about the individual that had a mental health issue, or it was something of somebody that didn't even have a mental issue down in Memphis, Tennessee, where 5 or 6 officers basically beat a guy to death, or George Floyd, these people must be properly trained in understanding that if their feelings is on their shirt sleeves, they are going to get hurt. That was one of the primary reasons why that I personally chose, whenever I finally figured out that, hey, you got 2 choices in the matter of being disabled. Whenever I fell off of a 4-story building, you got 2 choices, Dennis. You can either remain like you are in basically being dependent upon the government and dependent upon other people in trying to halfway live a normal life after breaking 2 legs and crushing both ankles and about 25 pieces apiece, and crushing 3 vertebrae in my back, breaking both arms, and laying in the hospital for over 6 weeks. I can either live with being that way, or I can pull up my bootstraps and try to rehabilitate myself in becoming self-sufficient. And I did. God was with me. God helped me towards my healing. It took about 4 years to heal up. I started out in a wheelchair, started out bedridden. Then I went from bedridden to a wheelchair, from a wheelchair to crutches, from crutches to a cane. And then finally I got to where that I could handle myself. Of course, at that time, I only weighed about 160 pounds. But I maintained a 35 plus year status in being self-reliant and self-independent without having to rely upon to social services pretending to being disabled. As soon as I got into the working class load and I realized that I could handle myself towards doing auto body work, I quit drawing a check from the Social Security Disability Administration, because now I had become strong enough to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. Well, the individual that done what they done to me up in Kentucky, as far as I'm concerned, they need to basically be horsewhipped.